They left for Disney World believing life was finally turning a corner. Months of saving, planning, and hard work had led to this moment. A full week of laughter, sunshine, and family memories. The Marshalls weren't rich, just ordinary people who had built their lives around an ordinary dream. A home they could call their own. And now, with their newly built sunroom, approved, inspected, and perfectly legal, that dream felt complete. That room wasn't just glass and wood. It was a symbol. It was where Emma, their 7-year-old daughter, planned to set up her art desk. Where their teenage son, Noah, wanted to read on rainy afternoons. It was where they'd imagined Christmas mornings, family dinners, and quiet nights watching the sunset. It was the heart of their home, warm, bright, and full of hope. But the day they returned from vacation, something was wrong. As their SUV rolled down Maple Ridge Drive, they noticed neighbors peeking through curtains. The air felt different, heavier, quieter. When they turned the corner and saw their house, Lisa Marshall's hand flew to her mouth. Her husband Mark slammed the brakes. The sunroom gone. Not damaged. Not vandalized. Gone. Torn down to the foundation. The glass panels were shattered across the lawn. The beams splintered and tossed into a dumpster that stood crookedly in the driveway. Inside it, the family's belongings. Chairs. Toys. A photo album half buried under rubble. Their memories thrown out like trash. For a moment, they thought there had been some kind of accident, maybe a fire, maybe a storm. But there was no smell of smoke, no signs of weather damage. Only a small white sign stuck in the ground where the sunroom once stood. HOA enforcement action. Unsafe structure removed. The letters burned in their minds. The HOA, the same people they'd paid dues to every month, the same board that held community picnics and holiday contests, had done this. While they were hundreds of miles away, smiling for photos at Disney World, someone had sent a demolition crew to their home. No phone call, no message, no warning. When Mark called the HOA president in disbelief, the answer came cold and calculated. It was an emergency. The structure posed a safety hazard. A safety hazard? The same sunroom that passed every city inspection? The same one approved by building officials just weeks earlier? That night, standing in their torn-up yard under the flicker of a broken porch light, the Marshalls realized this wasn't just about property. This was about power. Someone had wanted to make an example out of them, and they had chosen the moment the family was gone to strike. But what the HOA didn't know was that their act of arrogance had ignited something much stronger than fear. Because Mark and Lisa weren't going to stay silent. They were going to fight back, and what they uncovered would expose corruption, greed, and personal vendettas hiding behind the polite smile of a community association. This is the story of how one family's dream home became a demolition site, and how their search for justice would shake the foundation of an entire neighborhood. Because when the people meant to protect your community turn against you, what's left to call home? 4 years, Mark and Lisa Marshall had lived in the same modest 2-story home on Maple Ridge Drive. A quiet, manicured street where mailboxes were matching, lawns were trimmed to regulation height, and the HOA newsletter arrived like clockwork every first Monday. To an outsider, it looked like the picture of suburban perfection. But for the Marshalls, it was more than that. It was the home where they'd raised their 2 children, where birthdays, scraped knees, and late-night laughter had filled every room. Still, something had always been missing. A place to breathe, to sit together as a family, to watch the sunset after long days. The living room felt cramped, the kitchen always too small. It was Lisa who first mentioned it one evening while washing dishes, sunlight spilling through the back window. "What if we added a sunroom?" she said softly. "Just a little space, somewhere warm, open, a place we could actually live in." Mark looked at her, then at the narrow patio that led to their backyard. He smiled. "A sunroom," he said. "I like that." That simple idea became the start of something big. Over the next few months, they saved, planned, and researched every detail. They met with contractors, applied for city permits, and spent countless evenings poring over blueprints spread across their dining table. They wanted everything to be done right. No shortcuts, no surprises. Mark even went down to City Hall personally, talking to inspectors and zoning officers to make sure their addition met every code and requirement. Finally, after weeks of back and forth, they got it, the city's official approval. The stamped permit meant everything was by the book. The design was safe, legal, and compliant with local ordinances. The marshals felt proud, relieved, and excited. It wasn't just a construction project anymore. It was a dream about to take shape. When the first hammer struck wood, the sound echoed with hope. Their kids watched from the upstairs window, their faces lit with wonder. "That's going to be our playroom," Emma shouted. Noah grinned. "More like my reading room." The laughter carried across the street, where a few neighbors peeked from their porches, curious about the project. First, it was all smiles. The HOA's community manager, Mrs. Porter, even waved one morning as she walked her dog. "Looks nice," she said cheerfully. Mark took it as a good sign. But there was another pair of eyes watching, eyes that didn't smile. From the porch across the street, a man named Richard Harlan, the HOA president, stood with his coffee mug, expression hard as concrete. He'd been president for 6 years, and he liked things his way. The Marshall's home was technically fine. Their yard was neat, their dues always paid, but Richard didn't like surprises. And the sight of construction without his approval wasn't something he took lightly. That evening, Mark got his first email from the HOA office. It was polite but firm. "Dear Mr. Marshall, we noticed ongoing construction at your property. Please confirm that you've submitted the necessary plans for review under our architectural guidelines. Any unapproved modifications may result in a violation notice. Regards, Maple Ridge Homeowners Association." Mark frowned. He had the city's approval, permits, inspections, everything, but no one mentioned needing HOA permission too. Still, he wanted to play it safe. He replied the same evening, attaching copies of his city permit and architectural plans. He even dropped off a printed set at the HOA office. A week passed. No reply. The contractors kept working, framing the walls, setting the glass panels, bringing the structure to life. Neighbors stopped by, admiring how beautiful it looked. "You're going to love it in the summer," one said. But then the first letter arrived. A bright orange envelope stamped with the HOA logo. Inside, a notice. "Unapproved architectural change. Your property is in violation of Section 5, Article 7 of the Maple Ridge Guidelines. Cease all construction until your modification is reviewed and approved by the board." Lisa's hands shook as she read it. "But we have city approval," she said. "This can't be right." Mark called the HOA office immediately. Mrs. Porter picked up, her tone clipped. "Yes, Mr. Marshall, we received your paperwork, but it hasn't gone before the board yet. Until then, all construction must stop." Mark took a deep breath. "With respect, I have a city permit. The inspectors already signed off. Everything is legal. City permits are separate from HOA guidelines," she replied. "Our rules exist to maintain the community's aesthetic integrity." Aesthetic integrity. Those words hung in his mind like a bad echo. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He looked out the window at the unfinished sunroom. The framing glowed faintly under the streetlight, promising warmth and light and family. He wasn't going to give up on it. A few days later, he attended the next HOA board meeting. It was held in the clubhouse. Fluorescent lights, coffee urns, and the faint smell of frustration that always filled the air. When it was his turn to speak, Mark stood before the board with his papers in hand. He explained everything, the city approval, the safety inspections, the professional plans. He even showed renderings of the finished sunroom. The other board members looked at each other, impressed. But Richard Harlan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, face unreadable. When Mark finished, Richard spoke slowly. "The board will review your request," he said. "But construction should not proceed until we've issued written approval." Mark nodded politely. "I understand. I just hope you'll see we followed all legal requirements." Richard smiled thinly. Legal doesn't always mean appropriate for the community. The meeting ended, and Mark left with a strange chill in his gut. Something in Richard's tone didn't sit right. It wasn't just about rules, it felt personal. Over the next 2 weeks, no decision came. Mark emailed again. No reply. Meanwhile, the contractors couldn't wait forever. Every delay meant higher costs. So, Mark made the call to keep building. Carefully, quietly, trusting that once the HOA saw it finished, they'd realize it added value, not harm. By early spring, the sunroom was complete. It was stunning, floor-to-ceiling glass, a vaulted ceiling with skylights, and white oak floors that glowed in the afternoon light. When Lisa stepped inside for the first time, she burst into tears. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's everything we wanted." They decorated it with wicker chairs, plants, and framed family photos. Emma hung her drawings by the window. Noah set up a reading nook. The family spent every evening there, eating dinner, watching fireflies, laughing under the stars. But across the street, Richard watched in silence. He saw the light glowing from the sunroom, the laughter drifting into the night, and something in him hardened. Within days, another letter arrived. Then another, each one more aggressive than the last, demanding removal of the unapproved structure, citing violation of HOA architectural harmony, and threatening fines. Lisa's hands trembled as she read the words. Removal? What does that even mean? Mark tried to stay calm. They can't do anything. The city approved it. We'll appeal if we have to. But somewhere deep inside, he felt the storm brewing. Because in Maple Ridge, the HOA wasn't just a committee. It was a kingdom, and Richard Harlan, he ruled it like a tyrant. The Marshalls didn't know it yet, but their beautiful sunroom, the space built with love and patience, had just become ground zero for the battle that would destroy everything they'd built. At first, the Marshalls thought it was all a misunderstanding. A paperwork issue. Maybe a delay with the HOA board. After all, how bad could it get? They'd followed every rule, every legal step. They had the city's blessing. It didn't seem possible that something as simple as a sunroom could turn into a fight. But that illusion shattered 2 weeks later, when the first fine notice arrived. The envelope was thick, stamped with the HOA's logo. Inside, a bill. Violation fee, $250 per day. Unauthorized structure. Mark read it twice, his eyes narrowing. Per day, he muttered. They're charging us $250 per day? Lisa leaned over his shoulder, her voice trembling. That's insane. Mark called the HOA office immediately, only to get a calm but cold response from the community manager, Mrs. Porter. Mr. Marshall, as long as the structure remains unapproved, fines will continue to accumulate. The board has made its decision. The board? Mark snapped. When did that happen? I haven't received any written denial. The board determined that your addition violates Section 5, Article 7, Architectural Uniformity, she replied flatly. You'll receive the minutes in the next newsletter. He hung up, disbelief turning into anger. They'd met in secret, decided without giving him a chance to defend himself. That night, Lisa sat at the kitchen table staring at the growing stack of letters. Mark, this isn't just about money, she whispered. This is harassment. Mark sighed, rubbing his forehead. I know, but if we ignore them, it'll get worse. I'll write an appeal. I'll meet with them again. He did. 2 days later, he stood once more in front of the HOA board. A long table lined with serious faces, papers stacked like weapons. At the head sat Richard Harlan, his hands clasped neatly, his expression unreadable. Mark spoke calmly, carefully. He showed the permit again, the inspection reports, even photos of the construction process. Everything was done by licensed contractors, he said. We followed every legal step. We just wanted a little more space for our family. I don't understand what the issue is. Richard's response was slow, deliberate. The issue, Mr. Marshall, is that your structure does not conform to the neighborhood's visual standards. The design introduces materials and dimensions inconsistent with our architectural harmony. In short, it stands out. Mark frowned. That's the point of design. Every home here is different in some way. Richard leaned forward. Rules exist for a reason. The HOA protects property values. If we let one homeowner do whatever they want, what's next? Metal roofs? Neon paint? Chicken coops? A murmur of agreement came from one of the board members. Mark felt his pulse quicken. With respect, this isn't a neon roof. It's a glass sunroom. It adds value. It's modern. It's safe. Richard smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Safe is irrelevant if it's non-compliant. Lisa, sitting quietly behind him, clenched her hands together. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them how her kids loved that room, how it brought their family together again after years of stress. But she stayed silent, because every word from Richard dripped with authority. Cold, condescending authority that dared anyone to challenge him. The board voted. 5 against 1. Denied. When they got home that night, the atmosphere was heavy. The kids could feel it. Emma asked quietly, "Mommy, are we in trouble?" Lisa knelt down and hugged her. "No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble. Some people just don't understand good things when they see them." The fines kept coming. $250 a day. Then $500. Then threats of liens against their home if they didn't pay. Mark's stomach turned every time he opened the mailbox. He stopped checking it for days at a time. Then came the next escalation, the inspection notice. A letter arrived stating that the HOA's structural compliance inspector would be entering their property to evaluate safety hazards. Mark had never heard of such a title. The HOA wasn't a government agency. It had no inspectors. He called Mrs. Porter again. "Who is this inspector?" he demanded. "Mr. Harlan appointed a contractor to assess the structure," she replied. "Without our consent? It's within the HOA's authority to ensure safety compliance." Mark slammed the phone down. "Authority," he muttered. "They think they own this place." The following morning, while Mark was at work and Lisa was walking Emma to school, a white pickup truck pulled up to their house. A man in a neon vest got out, clipboard in hand, and started taking pictures of the sunroom. He didn't knock, didn't ask permission, just snapped photo after photo. Lisa came home mid-morning and saw him through the window. "Excuse me," she called out, stepping outside. "Can I help you?" The man turned, startled. Just doing an inspection." "Inspection for who?" "Maple Ridge HOA." Lisa's voice rose. "You're on private property. You can't just walk around taking pictures." The man shrugged. "Take it up with them." He got in his truck and drove away. That night, Mark's anger reached its limit. He sent a certified letter demanding that the HOA cease all unauthorized entries onto his property. He even contacted the city's legal department, asking if the HOA had any authority to enforce safety inspections. The answer was clear. They didn't. "They're overstepping," the city official said. "If they try anything physical, call the police." It should have ended there, but it didn't. The next HOA newsletter arrived a week later. Right on the front page, under Richard's monthly message, was a section titled Architectural Compliance Reminder. It listed vague examples of unapproved modifications, including glass additions not consistent with community standards. Everyone knew who it was aimed at. The neighbors started whispering. Some avoided eye contact. Others asked curious, uncomfortable questions. "Hey Mark, is it true your addition didn't pass inspection? I heard there's a safety issue?" The rumors spread like wildfire, and the marshal's once friendly neighborhood turned cold. Lisa stopped going to the community pool. The kids stopped playing outside. Mark stopped waving to the neighbors. Every sound of footsteps outside made them tense. The HOA had turned their community into a cage. Then came one last letter, the most chilling of all. Final notice. Failure to comply with removal order within 30 days will result in HOA action to remediate the violation. Costs will be billed to the homeowner. Mark read it 3 times, his pulse pounding. "Remediate the violation?" he repeated. "What does that even mean?" Lisa looked at him, eyes wide with fear. "They wouldn't." But before he could answer, she whispered the unthinkable. "Mark, they mean tear it down." He stared at her in silence. A bitter taste rose in his throat. "They wouldn't dare." She shook her head slowly. "You don't know Richard. Mark exhaled, his voice low and full of steel. Then he doesn't know me either, because from that moment, the marshals decided they wouldn't be bullied. They began gathering documents, photos, and legal records. They started reaching out to city officials, lawyers, anyone who could help them fight back. But what they didn't realize was that the HOA had already made up its mind. Behind closed doors, a plan was being written. One that would be carried out the moment the marshals left their home unattended. And when that moment came, everything they'd built would vanish in a single heartless act. By the time summer rolled around, the marshals were exhausted. Emotionally, financially, spiritually. Months of back and forth with the HOA had drained every ounce of peace from their lives. What started as a family dream had turned into a daily war. And yet, through all the chaos, they clung to one promise, the vacation. It had been planned long before the HOA nightmare began. A full week in Orlando, Disney World. The kids' dream come true. For months, little Emma had been counting the days on a paper calendar she'd made herself, crossing out each morning with a bright pink marker. Noah had memorized the entire park map, already arguing which rides to hit first. Lisa wanted to cancel. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving their home while tensions were this high. But Mark insisted. "We can't let them steal this from us too," he said. "We've earned this. The kids deserve it." And so they packed their bags. Before leaving, Mark double-checked everything. The doors were locked. The security cameras were on. He even asked their next-door neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, to keep an eye on the house. "Don't worry," she said kindly. "If anything happens, I'll call you right away." The morning they left, the sun rose soft and golden over Maple Ridge Drive. For the first time in months, there was laughter again. The SUV was filled with music, snacks, and the sound of two excited kids in the back seat. As they pulled away, Lisa glanced at their home through the window, the sunroom gleaming in the light, and whispered, "It's so beautiful, Mark. I just want to come home to this, exactly how it is." Mark smiled. "You will." But what neither of them saw was Richard Harlan standing at the end of the street, arms crossed, watching their car disappear around the corner. That afternoon, he sent a single email to the HOA board. The subject line was simple: Emergency Enforcement Action, Property 74, Marshall Residence. In that message, he claimed that a resident's unapproved addition had been reported as posing an immediate safety risk to the community. He attached a few out-of-context photos from the so-called inspection, close-up shots of harmless support brackets, a single minor crack in the foundation, and vague captions implying structural failure. Within an hour, the board voted unanimously. Authorize emergency removal. No city approval. No legal review. Just 7 people on a neighborhood committee, deciding to destroy a family's property while they were hundreds of miles away. The following morning, a demolition permit application was faxed, not to the city, but to a private contractor already in Richard's back pocket. A man named Dale Turner, who'd done quiet jobs for the HOA before. Dale didn't ask questions. He got paid to remove, not to understand. Meanwhile, in Florida, the marshals were smiling for pictures in front of Cinderella's castle. For the first time in months, they felt like a family again. Emma wore her Minnie Mouse ears proudly. Noah couldn't stop talking about the roller coasters. Lisa, despite her worries, started to relax. For the first time, Mark wasn't thinking about fines or threats, just about being a dad. But back in Maple Ridge, something sinister was unfolding. On the second morning of their trip, Dale's white flatbed truck rolled quietly into the neighborhood. 2 men in hard hats jumped out, glanced at the printed order, and started unloading tools. The sound of metal clanking broke the stillness of the street. Mrs. Alvarez stepped out of her front door, confused. "Excuse me," she called out. "What are you doing?" One of the workers replied, "We're here to remove an unsafe structure, ma'am. HOA orders." She frowned. "That's not unsafe. That family just built that sunroom. It's brand new." The worker shrugged. "Ma'am, we've got authorization. You'll have to talk to them." By the time she reached for her phone to call Mark, Richard himself had pulled up in his SUV. He stepped out calmly, clipboard in hand, wearing his usual smug half-smile. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Alvarez," he said smoothly. "The Marshall's structure failed inspection. We're taking care of it before it causes damage. HOA protocol." She shook her head, angry now. "You can't just tear down someone's home without telling them." Richard's eyes narrowed. "It's an emergency action. We have the authority. I suggest you stay clear, for your safety." And with that, he turned and waved his hand. The crew started up their saws. By noon, the first section of the sunroom's glass wall was shattered, shards littering the grass like ice. Beams were pried loose, wood splintered, metal screeched. Inside the structure, furniture, children's toys, boxes, even the framed family photos, were tossed carelessly into a dumpster. No one from the HOA even bothered to remove them first. Mrs. Alvarez stood across the street, horrified, filming on her phone as the destruction continued. "This is insane," she muttered. "They can't do this." But no one stopped them. By the end of the day, the sunroom, that beautiful space built with love, was gone. Nothing but a concrete slab remained, cracked and littered with debris. The dumpster overflowed with what had once been the Marshall's dream. Richard walked up, surveyed the mess, and nodded. "Good work," he told the crew. "Send the invoice to the HOA office." As he got back into his car, the last beam of sunlight caught the shattered frame of a photo. Lisa and Mark holding their kids, smiling, with the words, "Our happy place," printed across the bottom. He didn't even look twice. That night, he sent another email. Structure removed. Safety concern resolved. Case closed. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the Marshalls were sitting in a hotel room, exhausted but happy. Emma was asleep, clutching her stuffed Mickey Mouse. Noah was scrolling through photos of their trip. Lisa looked at Mark and smiled. "See? I told you we needed this." Mark laughed softly. "Yeah. When we get home, let's sit in the sunroom with some coffee and tell the kids they can paint one wall however they want." Lisa's eyes sparkled. "Deal." Neither of them knew that by the time they got home, that wall, and everything inside it, would be gone. Not stolen, not damaged, destroyed. And as the Marshalls dreamed in their hotel beds that night, the HOA's bulldozers rested silently under the streetlights, their engines cooling, waiting for morning, waiting for the family to return to a home that would no longer be theirs. The flight home was long, but peaceful. For the first time in months, the Marshalls felt light again. 7 days at Disney had been everything they needed. Laughter, memories, the magic of being together without stress. Lisa scrolled through her phone, looking at the photos. Emma holding Mickey's hand, Noah laughing on Space Mountain, Mark smiling wider than he had in years. As the plane began its descent, she turned to him and said softly, "You know, for a while, I forgot all about the HOA." Mark chuckled. "Best week of my life for that reason alone." They didn't know that at that very moment, back on Maple Ridge Drive, a warm breeze blew over a yard full of broken glass, splintered wood, and silence. Their home, the place they'd dreamed of returning to, no longer existed as they'd left it. It was a bright afternoon when their SUV rolled into the neighborhood. The familiar streets looked calm, almost too calm. Mark smiled, pointing out the kids' school, the park, the corner cafe. Everything looked normal, until it didn't. Lisa was the first to notice. "Why are people staring?" she asked quietly. As they passed, curtains twitched. Neighbors paused mid-conversation. A few looked away. The air felt thick. Mark frowned. "That's weird." They turned onto their street. For a moment, everything seemed fine. And then Lisa gasped. "Mark, stop the car." He slammed the brakes. Tires screeched. The kids looked up from their tablets. "What's wrong?" Noah asked. But Mark couldn't speak. His eyes were fixed ahead, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Where their beautiful sunroom once stood, where sunlight used to pour through glass and laughter used to echo, there was now nothing. Just rubble. A jagged foundation, half covered in dust. The elegant glass panels they'd chosen so carefully were shattered across the lawn. The white oak flooring they'd loved was broken, warped, blackened by tire marks. And then Lisa saw it. The dumpster, parked crookedly in the driveway, filled to the brim with their belongings. Chairs, broken frames, children's toys, boxes crushed under debris. Her breath caught in her throat. She stumbled out of the car, hands shaking. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She ran to the dumpster, digging through it with trembling hands. She pulled out a photo, their family picture from Christmas, the frame cracked, the glass missing. She clutched it to her chest, sobbing. Emma started crying in the back seat, scared by her mother's screams. Noah climbed out quietly, eyes wide, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Mark got out, his voice hoarse. "Lisa, what happened?" That's when he saw the small white sign, hammered into the ground near the rubble. HOA enforcement action. Unsafe structure removed. He froze. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The world seemed to tilt. Lisa turned toward him, her face streaked with tears. They did this." Mark picked up the sign and threw it across the yard. "They destroyed our home," he shouted. His voice cracked, raw with disbelief. A few neighbors stood at a distance, watching. None of them came closer. None offered help. Only Mrs. Alvarez, trembling with guilt, slowly walked over. "Mark," she said softly, her eyes full of sorrow. "I tried to stop them. I called the HOA. I even called Richard. He said it was an emergency, that the sunroom was unsafe. He brought in a crew. They said they had authorization." "Authorization?" Mark barked. "From who? The devil?" Mrs. Alvarez flinched, tears in her eyes. "They came the day after you left. It happened so fast. They didn't even take anything out. I filmed it." She handed him her phone, and Mark pressed play. The video began with the rumble of machinery, the whine of saws, and Richard's voice off camera saying, "Proceed. It's not safe." Mark's knees went weak. He sank down on the grass, watching as strangers tore apart everything he'd built. Every beam, every nail, crushed under orders from a man who lived across the street. Lisa crouched beside him, clutching his arm. "This can't be legal," she whispered. "This can't be real." But it was. That night they couldn't sleep. The children stayed in the living room, silent and afraid. Lisa sat at the kitchen counter, staring at a stack of ruined mail that had been left on the porch. Mark sat outside under the flickering porch light, looking at what was left of their home. At midnight, he called the police. The officer arrived an hour later, tired, disinterested. After hearing the story, he said, "Sir, if this was done by your HOA, and they claim it was an emergency action, it's probably a civil matter. You'll need to talk to an attorney." Mark stared at him in disbelief. "A civil matter? They destroyed my property." "I understand, sir," the officer said gently. "But if they claim it was a safety concern, they may be protected under their bylaws. You'll have to take it to court." As the patrol car pulled away, the realization hit Mark like a hammer. No one was coming to fix this. No one was going to help them tonight. Lisa joined him outside, sitting beside him on the steps, their hands clasped. "They think they can get away with this," she whispered. Mark's eyes were cold, focused. Not for long. The next morning, the HOA office received his email. It was short, simple, and furious. "You destroyed my property while my family was away. You'll answer for this. Every single one of you." Hours later, Richard Harlan replied, "Mr. Marshall, your structure violated multiple HOA regulations and presented an immediate danger to neighboring properties. The board authorized emergency removal under Section 8.5 of our bylaws. We acted in the best interest of the community. Further correspondence on this matter should be directed to our legal counsel." That was it. No apology. No remorse. Just arrogance. Mark printed the email, placed it in a folder, and said quietly, "We're suing them, but lawsuits take time, money, patience." And in Maple Ridge, the HOA had all three. What the Marshalls didn't realize was that their fight for justice would uncover secrets, lies buried deep within the HOA's books, and power games that reached far beyond their little street. The demolition was only the beginning, because when you take everything from a person, their home, their dignity, their peace, you leave behind something dangerous. Resolve. And Mark Marshall was about to show the Maple Ridge HOA what happens when an ordinary man is pushed too far. The morning after the demolition, the Marshalls woke up to a silence that felt unnatural. The neighborhood birds still sang, the sun still rose, but inside their house, nothing felt alive. Every sound echoed through the hollowed rooms, a reminder of what was gone. Lisa stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the wreckage outside. The pile of debris looked smaller now, but crueler, like a scar that refused to heal. Mark was already on the phone, pacing the living room floor. "I don't care if it's Saturday," he snapped. "Someone from the city signed off on that addition. I want to know who gave the HOA permission to demolish it." He slammed his phone shut, furious. Voicemail. Again. Lisa turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're ignoring us." Mark nodded grimly. "They know what they did." By noon, word had spread through Maple Ridge. Some neighbors texted quiet condolences. Others avoided eye contact. But a few, the ones who always stood by the HOA, whispered things like, "They must have done something wrong," or "Maybe it really was unsafe." The worst part? The HOA loved that narrative. Later that afternoon, a white envelope appeared on their doorstep. The HOA's logo, bold and pristine, glared up from the front. Mark tore it open. Notice of violation. Unauthorized construction/safety hazard abatement. Pursuant to Section 8.5 of the Maple Ridge Community Bylaws, your unapproved addition was deemed structurally unsafe and in violation of aesthetic and safety standards. The HOA board authorized immediate removal. You are responsible for all associated cleanup and restoration costs. Amount due, $11,782.44. Payment due within 30 days. Mark's face turned pale. "They're billing us for the demolition," he said in disbelief. Lisa snatched the paper. "They destroy our property and then charge us for it?" Mark stormed outside, walking straight toward the HOA office across the street. The small brick building sat behind a neat flower bed, the very picture of suburban order. But when he burst through the door, the illusion shattered. Richard Harlan sat behind the desk, sipping coffee, calm as ever. "Mr. Marshall," he said coolly, "I was expecting you. You destroyed my home." Mark roared. "Who gave you the right?" Richard leaned back. "The board did, and our attorney confirmed we were within our rights. You had no city authorization. That addition was approved, Richard. We had the permit." Richard smiled faintly. "A city permit doesn't override community standards, Mark. You should have waited for our architectural review." Mark's hands clenched into fists. "We submitted the plans. You ignored them for months." Richard stood slowly. "Because the design didn't fit our guidelines. You built it anyway. Actions have consequences." For a moment, the two men just stared at each other. Mark's voice shook. "You did this on purpose." Richard's expression hardened. "You left me no choice." Mark turned and left before his rage boiled over. Outside, Lisa waited in the car, tears in her eyes. "What did he say?" Mark's jaw tightened. "He's hiding behind bylaws." That night, Mark stayed up late combing through every piece of paperwork. The permit, the inspection approval, the email threads with the HOA. He spread them across the kitchen table like puzzle pieces. Then he found something. An email dated 2 weeks before the demolition. From Richard Harlan to the HOA's construction committee. "The Marshalls have ignored our requests. Their addition is an eyesore and violates our symmetry standards. If they won't remove it voluntarily, we may need to exercise emergency authority." No mention of safety, no mention of hazard, just aesthetic disapproval. Mark printed it, his hands shaking with both rage and purpose. "Gotcha," he muttered. The next day he called an attorney. Her name was Rebecca Cole, sharp, relentless, and known for taking on HOAs. When he told her what happened, she didn't interrupt once. When he finished, she said just one thing. They overstepped. Badly. But we'll need proof. Lots of it. Rebecca met them the following afternoon. She walked through the yard, photographing the rubble, examining the foundation. They didn't even follow demolition protocol, she said. No warning, no signage, no inspection record. That's illegal on multiple levels. Lisa's voice trembled. Can we make them rebuild it? Rebecca looked up. If we win, yes. But this is going to be a fight. A few days later, Mark received an email from a city inspector, a man named Thomas Avery. Mr. Marshall, I reviewed your permit records. There was no city-issued demolition order for your property. If your HOA claims city authorization, they're lying. Mark forwarded it to Rebecca. Her response came within minutes. This is exactly what we need. They're hiding something. Meanwhile, Richard and the HOA were busy rewriting history. A new post appeared on the Maple Ridge Community Forum. The board acted responsibly to protect neighborhood safety after multiple residents reported structural instability at the Marshall residence. We regret the family's loss but stand by our decision. Beneath it, a stream of comments, some supportive, others skeptical. One anonymous reply stood out. Funny how it was unsafe, only after Mark refused to pay Richard's contractor for the inspection. The post disappeared within an hour. The HOA had begun its cover-up. Emails were deleted. Meeting notes vanished. And anyone who asked questions was quietly warned to drop it. But one person didn't. Mrs. Alvarez. She knocked on Mark's door late one evening, holding a small USB drive. They're lying, she said. I was at the board meeting before you left for vacation. They never mentioned safety. They talked about setting an example. Mark looked at the drive in her trembling hand. You recorded it? She nodded. I was scared. But now, you need it more than I do. Rebecca played the recording the next day. Richard's voice filled the office. If we let the Marshalls get away with this, everyone will start building whatever they want. We have to take a stand now while they're gone. Another voice asked, but isn't that illegal? We'll call it a safety concern. That'll shut them up. Silence followed. Lisa covered her mouth, tears spilling over. They planned it. They waited for us to leave. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. Then we've got them. The lawsuit was filed the next week. Marshall versus Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, claiming property destruction, fraud, abuse of power, and emotional distress. Local news picked up the story almost immediately. Family returns from vacation to find home destroyed by HOA, the headline read. Within hours, it spread online. Mark stood in his driveway as a reporter asked, Mr. Marshall, what do you hope to achieve with this lawsuit? He looked straight into the camera. I want accountability. They think they're untouchable. They're not. But Richard wasn't going down quietly. He released a statement to the press. The HOA acted responsibly under emergency circumstances. We sympathize with the Marshalls but reject their baseless accusations. This is a community issue, not a legal one. Behind the scenes, however, cracks were forming. 2 board members quietly resigned. One emailed Rebecca anonymously, saying, Richard told us the city approved it. We didn't know he forged the letter. The truth was unraveling, and it was uglier than anyone imagined. By the end of that month, Rebecca uncovered proof that Richard had used his brother-in-law's demolition company for the teardown, a company that had just been paid $30,000 from the HOA's maintenance fund. It was fraud, plain and simple. Mark stared at the evidence in disbelief. He destroyed my home to line his own pockets. Rebecca nodded. And we're going to make sure he never does it again. The HOA had started this war thinking they could bury the truth under bylaws and lies. But now the story was public. The neighborhood was talking. The board was splintering. And Richard Harlan, the man who once controlled everything, was starting to lose it all. Because for the first time in Maple Ridge's history, the HOA had met someone who wouldn't bow down. And Mark Marshall was just getting started. But for the Marshalls, the storm was over. The truth had finally stood taller than the lies. And as the sunlight poured once again through their glass walls, Mark whispered, "We're home." The courthouse steps gleamed under a pale morning sun as Mark and Lisa Marshall walked up hand in hand. Reporters swarmed the entrance, microphones flashing like lightning. Cameras followed their every move, shouting questions over one another. "Mr. Marshall, do you think Richard Harlan will plead guilty?" "Mrs. Marshall, what do you hope to achieve from this trial?" Lisa squeezed Mark's hand. "Keep walking," she whispered. He nodded. "We're not here to talk. We're here to finish it." Inside, the air was heavy with tension. Rows of spectators filled the benches. Neighbors, journalists, even former HOA members who now wanted to see justice done. The judge entered, his gavel striking sharply. Court is now in session for Marshall versus Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. Mark glanced toward the defense table. Richard sat there in a crisp gray suit, hair combed neatly, face expressionless. But his eyes betrayed him, nervous, darting, calculating. The HOA's attorney, a slick man named Jonathan Pierce, stood first. "Your Honor," he began, "this case has been blown out of proportion by media sensationalism. The HOA acted within its bylaws to address a safety concern. While we regret the family's distress, there was no malicious intent." Rebecca Cole rose from her seat slowly, her gaze fixed on Richard. "No malicious intent?" she repeated. "They destroyed a family's home without permission, without legal authority, and without due process, then tried to cover it up with forged documents. That isn't a misunderstanding. That's a crime." The courtroom murmured. The judge nodded. "Proceed, Ms. Cole." Rebecca began by laying out the evidence: city permits, inspection reports, emails, meeting recordings. She spoke with precision, every sentence hitting like a hammer. "This," she said, holding up a printed email, "is from Mr. Harlan 2 weeks before the demolition. He called the Marshalls' home an eyesore and said, quote, 'If we let them get away with this, everyone will start building whatever they want. No mention of safety, no emergency, just control.'" Jonathan Pierce objected. "That email lacks context." Rebecca smiled faintly. "Then let's play the recording that gives it." The sound of Richard's voice filled the courtroom. "We'll call it a safety concern. That'll shut them up." Gasps spread through the room. Richard's face drained of color. Rebecca turned to the jury. "They didn't act to protect anyone. They acted to protect their authority." Next came the witnesses. Mrs. Alvarez was the first to take the stand. Nervous, hands trembling, she adjusted her glasses and spoke softly. "I saw it happen. They brought trucks, bulldozers, men with sledgehammers. I told them to wait. I told them the Marshalls had a permit. Richard said he had emergency authorization. But there was no emergency." Rebecca asked, "Did you hear anything else?" Mrs. Alvarez nodded slowly. "Yes," Richard said. "Do it before they get back from vacation." Jonathan tried to discredit her, calling her a concerned but mistaken neighbor. But her quiet conviction silenced him. Next, the foreman testified. He explained how Richard had personally ordered the demolition, waiving a letter that claimed city approval, a letter investigators later proved was forged. Finally, Mark took the stand. The courtroom went still as he adjusted the microphone. "We followed every rule," he began. "We got the permits, passed inspection, sent the plans to the HOA. They ignored us for months, so we built it legally. That sunroom wasn't just a project. It was for my wife, who'd battled through depression after her father passed. It was a place for light, for healing. And they destroyed it while we were away with our kids." He paused, voice cracking. "We came home to rubble. My son's toys thrown in the trash. My daughter's drawings covered in dust. And they called it a safety concern. No, it was revenge. It was power. And it broke us." Lisa sat in the audience, tears streaming down her face. Even the judge looked down for a moment, solemn. When Mark stepped down, Rebecca turned toward the defense table. "No further witnesses, Your Honor, except one more." She opened a folder and pulled out a document. "The HOA's former treasurer, Janet Lewis, has provided sworn testimony. She confirms the board never approved the demolition." Richard acted alone, then forged the minutes to make it appear legitimate. The judge leaned forward. "Is this true, Mr. Harlan?" Richard's lawyer whispered urgently, but Richard raised his chin. "I did what I had to do to protect the neighborhood. If you let one homeowner ignore the rules, it all falls apart." Rebecca's voice cut through like glass. "You protected your ego, not the community. You forged documents. You lied to the city. You stole HOA funds and destroyed a family's home. That's not leadership. That's tyranny." The judge's gavel struck once. Enough. After a short recess, both sides presented their closing arguments. Jonathan tried to spin the story. Miscommunication, procedural error, good intentions gone wrong. But his words rang hollow. Then Rebecca stood before the jury. Her voice softened. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Marshalls didn't just lose a room. They lost their faith in fairness, in community, in the idea that rules protect us instead of destroying us. If this board can demolish a home without consequence, then no homeowner is safe. Today, you decide whether power has limits or not." She sat down. The courtroom fell silent. Hours passed as the jury deliberated. Mark and Lisa waited in the hallway, holding hands. Every tick of the clock felt like thunder. Finally, the bailiff called them back in. The judge read the verdict. "In the matter of Marshall versus Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiffs." Lisa gasped. Mark closed his eyes, tears welling. The judge continued. "The HOA is ordered to compensate the Marshalls for full reconstruction costs, damages totaling $600,000, and attorney fees. Additionally, criminal charges against Mr. Harlan will proceed separately." The courtroom erupted, reporters scribbling, cameras flashing. Lisa wept into Mark's shoulder. Rebecca smiled, exhausted but victorious. Richard sat motionless, staring ahead. His empire, his pride, his control gone in a single verdict. Outside the courthouse, Mark spoke briefly to the cameras. "This was never just about money," he said. "It was about justice. No one should be able to destroy a home and hide behind bylaws. Today we proved that." That night, the Marshalls returned to their house. Quiet, humble, still scarred, but full of peace. The children were asleep when Lisa lit a candle on the windowsill of the new sunroom. She whispered, "We did it." Mark nodded slowly. "No, you did it. You never gave up." In the distance, the lights of Maple Ridge shimmered under the night sky. A community forever changed. Some neighbors learned humility, others courage. But everyone learned one truth: power without accountability will always crumble. For the Marshalls, the chapter of pain was closing. But what came next would go far beyond their neighborhood. Because their fight had sparked a nationwide conversation about HOA abuse, and real change was coming. As the camera of memory faded on their quiet home, Mark's voice echoed like a promise. "Home isn't what they can take from you. It's what you fight to rebuild." The day of reckoning didn't arrive with fireworks or fanfare. It came quietly, a gray morning in autumn, when the air outside the county courthouse smelled of rain and earth. The Marshalls stood at the courthouse steps hand in hand, the same way they had once stood in front of their demolished sunroom, except now, there was no confusion in their eyes, only resolve. For nearly a year, they had lived under the weight of what the HOA had done, the destruction, the sleepless nights, the endless denials. But today, they were done being victims. Today, they were going to make the truth impossible to ignore. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back row. Neighbors, the same ones who once whispered behind closed doors, now sat silent, their faces a mixture of shame and anticipation. On the left sat the Marshalls with their attorney, a calm, deliberate man named Richard Hale. On the right, the Willow Creek HOA board, 5 members stiff in their chairs, their president, Carla Denton, looking like a statue carved out of arrogance. When the judge entered, the room fell still. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder. For hours, the lawyers debated permits, bylaws, and emergency powers. The HOA's attorney repeated the same defense over and over, that the demolition had been an urgent safety measure, that the structure was unstable, that they had acted to protect the community. But as Hale rose for the final argument, he didn't begin with paperwork. He began with a photograph. It was the Marshall family, standing in front of their home just weeks before the demolition. The sunroom gleamed behind them, spotless, sturdy, intact. He held it up for the courtroom to see. "This," he said slowly, "is what the HOA called an imminent safety hazard. This structure was inspected and approved by the city. There were no complaints, no reports, no warnings. The only thing this family did wrong was build something that one woman decided she didn't like." He turned toward Carla, his voice sharp but calm. "And that woman is sitting right there." Carla's lawyer objected. The judge overruled it. Hale continued, pacing in front of the bench. While the Marshalls were on vacation, not notified, not consulted, not even given a chance to respond, this HOA hired a demolition company and tore down a legal, permitted structure. They threw away family belongings. They damaged personal property. They violated the city code. And when confronted, they hid behind a false emergency. He clicked a button, and the screen behind him changed. Emails. Real, time-stamped, undeniable emails. The room held its breath as Hale read the words aloud. Messages between Carla and another board member dated 3 days before the demolition. "If we let the Marshalls keep that addition, everyone will start building whatever they want. Agreed. We'll handle it while they're gone. Less resistance that way." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Carla's lawyer scrambled to object, but the judge allowed it. Hale turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this wasn't about safety. It was about ego. It was about control. It was a vendetta carried out behind closed doors, and they thought they could get away with it because no one ever challenges the HOA." He paused, letting the silence speak. Then he said softly, "But this family did." When it was the Marshal's turn to testify, Lisa's voice trembled at first. She described coming home from vacation, how Emma had cried when she saw her drawings in the dumpster, how Noah had picked through the rubble to find his grandmother's photo album, the one she'd kept since the 1950s. The courtroom listened in silence. Then Mark took the stand. His words were steady, measured, but full of quiet fury. "I work in construction. I know what a hazard looks like. What they did wasn't protection, it was punishment. They wanted to make an example out of us. And they thought we'd roll over. But a home isn't just a building. It's the soul of a family. You don't get to destroy that because of a grudge." When he stepped down, even the reporters in the back were scribbling with wide eyes. The story that began as a local dispute had become something much bigger, a symbol of power gone unchecked. By the time closing arguments ended, the truth was no longer in question. The judge's expression was hard to read, but the weight in the room was palpable. She took a deep breath, shuffled the papers before her, and spoke. "After reviewing all presented evidence," she said, "it is the finding of this court that the Willow Creek Homeowners Association acted unlawfully and beyond the scope of its authority." Carla's head jerked up. The demolition of the Marshall structure was not justified under any reasonable interpretation of emergency powers. Furthermore, the actions were premeditated, retaliatory, and executed with reckless disregard for property rights. Lisa's hands flew to her mouth. Mark reached over and gripped her arm. "The HOA," the judge continued, "is ordered to compensate the plaintiffs for full reconstruction costs, personal property loss, and emotional damages, totaling $482,000. Additionally, the court recommends a full state investigation into the HOA's governance practices." Carla's face turned pale. The gavel came down hard. Case closed. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. The clouds broke, sunlight spilling across the courthouse steps. Reporters swarmed, microphones flashing, but Mark didn't stop to talk. He and Lisa just stood there in the open air, silent, their hands clasped tightly. After a long moment, Lisa whispered, "It's over." Mark looked at her and said, "No, it's finally beginning." Because that ruling didn't just rebuild their sunroom, it changed everything. Within weeks, the story went viral. News outlets across the country picked it up. The phrase Disney demolition became a headline that made homeowners everywhere question the unchecked power of their own associations. Emails flooded in, people sharing their own horror stories, their own battles against overreaching HOAs. The Marshals' courage had opened a door that could never be closed again. In Willow Creek, the fallout was immediate. At the next HOA meeting, the clubhouse overflowed with residents. Carla tried to gavel the meeting to order, but the crowd drowned her out. Homeowners demanded resignations, demanded transparency, demanded accountability. By the end of that night, for board members, including Carla, had stepped down. And for the first time in years, the community began to feel like a neighborhood again. The reconstruction of the sunroom began in spring. This time, the city and the community watched with admiration. Volunteers came to help. Neighbors who once turned away now offered to paint, clean, and rebuild. Even the demolition crew that had unknowingly carried out the HOA's orders came back, free of charge, to help restore what was lost. When the final glass panel slid into place, the light poured in once again, warm, soft, forgiving. Lisa stood inside, tears streaming down her cheeks. The air smelled like new wood and hope. Emma set her art desk by the window again, her crayons lined neatly in a row. Noah hung a framed photo on the wall, a photo taken before everything fell apart. The family stood together, not broken but stronger than ever. Mark looked around the sunroom and said quietly, "They can take down walls, but they can't take away what we built here." And in that moment, the sound of laughter returned to the house, the sound of peace. Months later, the HOA investigation concluded. The state found gross misconduct, violations of property law, and misuse of community funds. Carla was fined heavily and banned from serving on any board again. She sold her house quietly and moved away. No one in Willow Creek missed her. In time, the Marshall story became a lesson, not just for their neighborhood, but for millions who watched online. A reminder that power without accountability always leads to abuse. And that standing up, even when you feel small, can change everything. As Mark said in a later interview, "We didn't go looking for a fight, but when someone destroys what you love, you either give up or you rebuild stronger." He smiled then, looking at the rebuilt sunroom behind him. "We chose to rebuild." The camera pans slowly to the glass walls, sunlight glinting off them like redemption itself. Because in the end, the Marshalls didn't just rebuild a room, they rebuilt faith. Faith in standing tall. Faith in doing what's right. Faith that even against the biggest bullies, truth still wins. And as the final light of day faded through the windows of that once destroyed room, one thing became clear. Home isn't just where you live. It's what you protect. And for the Marshalls, that fight was worth everything. If you think what happened to the Marshalls was unbelievable, just wait until you hear what one HOA president tried next. They fined a homeowner $500 for a single birthday balloon and thought they'd get away with it. But what that homeowner discovered behind the scenes, it exposed a scandal that would shake the entire neighborhood. That story's coming up next on this channel. If you've ever felt powerless against rules that make no sense, or if you've ever wondered how far an HOA can really go, make sure you don't miss it. Hit that like button if you believe what the Marshalls did was right. Share this video to remind people that no one is above accountability, not even an HOA. And subscribe with the bell icon on, because next time, the fight for justice gets even darker, and the truth will leave you speechless. This is the real world of HOA power, and we're just getting started.